right, everybody, welcome to the Otherppl Show. This is my podcast. I'm Brad Listi. Welcome. Thank you for listening. I hope you're doing all right. Hope everything's going okay. Hope you're holding steady wherever you happen to be. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button wherever you listen. You can also subscribe on YouTube, and you can follow me on social media, Bluesky and Instagram. So Gabrielle Bates is my guest today. She is the author of a poetry collection called Judas Goat, and it is available from Tin House. Had a great talk with Gabrielle Bates. That's coming up. And what can I tell you? It's rainy, or it was rainy in Los Angeles. We got some rain. We got some more rain. We had rain last week, and then we got a lot of rain yesterday, which was great. We need the rain after the fires. We need the wildfire danger to abate, so the rain is good. But then because of the wildfires, like not only because of the wildfires, but like particularly so because of the wildfires, there is mudslide danger when it rains. So the rain is good, and yet the rain is bad. Not having rain is good because we won't have mudslides, but then we'll have fires. So there's just no escape. And like the algorithm has been feeding me lately, like these videos of people in Los Angeles who like are behaving. They're talking like they know what they're talking about. They sound like they're very sure of themselves, and they're talking about how everything is polluted and toxified, and the local government isn't doing anything to fix it, and the beach is covered in toxic ash, and children will be, are playing on the beach, and all this stuff. I don't know if you're getting those. I'm probably getting them because I live in Los Angeles. I don't know what to think. Does anybody know what's going on? The government will fix it. I feel like the government should be able to fix these kinds of things if we had like a good, reasonable, functional government. But everything seems so crazy. And I just read a quote. I don't even know where I read it, but it was about ignorance. It's like ignorance isn't the problem. It's ignorance of ignorance, which is the problem. Which I take to mean like people are ignorant and they don't know that they're ignorant. Or people are ignorant and people who are not ignorant don't realize that the people who are ignorant are ignorant. Anyway, I've been busy. I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, the fatigue. There's no end in sight. I'm going to be busy for the foreseeable future, possibly for the rest of my life. I'm not complaining. Everyone's busy. Or not everyone, but most people. I'm imagining that you, listening at home or wherever you're listening, I'm imagining that you too are busy. I feel maxed out. I feel like my brain is at capacity, but probably that's not true. There's always a little more room. You can stretch it out. Anyway, I'm very excited to have Gabrielle Bates on this show, to have a poet on the Otherppl Show for the first time in too long. Stay tuned for my talk with Gabrielle Bates. Don't forget that I do a weekly email newsletter. Just in case the podcast is not enough, I will write to you once a week via email. My name will show up in your inbox, and my newsletter is very simple. It's basically a list of links to things that I've been reading and finding interesting. And also I let you know about the latest episodes of this show. So if that sounds good, go sign up over at Substack, bradlisti.substack.com, and you'll hear from me once a week, occasionally twice, but usually once. Today's episode is brought to you by Live Right Press, publisher of the novel Victorian Psycho by Virginia Feyteau. This is the official February pick of the Otherppl Book Club. It's about a governess, in the Victorian era at this house in the British countryside. Things get weird, things get dark, things get bloody. Again, the book is called Victorian Psycho. I just had a great conversation with Virginia Feyteau about this book of hers, and you're going to hear that conversation soon on this program. So stay tuned for that. One more time, the novel is called Victorian Psycho by Virginia Feyteau, available from Live Right Press. All right, so my guest once again is Gabrielle Bates. Her new poetry collection is called Judas Goat, and it is available from Tin House. Gabrielle's poetry has appeared in a number of publications, including the New Yorker magazine, Poetry Magazine, American Poetry Review, and other venues. She is a writer, visual artist, and the co-host of the Poet Salonpodcast. She is originally from Birmingham, Alabama, and she now lives in Seattle. And before we get started with the conversation, I thought it might be nice to hear Gabrielle read one of her poems. So she's going to do that right now. This poem is called Dear Birmingham.
Dear Birmingham, I've been visiting again the cemetery with the sunken southern corner. Fish smaller than first teeth, birthed through the soil, maneuver in the glaze where rain pools, covering the lowest stones. Behind him, in a cracked white tub, my knees to his sides, left ear pressed to the stack of bones in his neck. I was once so terrified of my own contentment. I bit my shoulder and drew blood there, to the surface, past it. What I have wanted most is many lives, one for each longing, round and separate. Sometimes I bring figs here, asphyxiating in plastic, for their distant echo of your humid, ghost flesh air, that almost a human air. I was born in autumn as it fled underground to be fed to a body of water that only swallows.
All right, that was Gabrielle Bates reading a poem of hers called Dear Birmingham from her collection entitled Judas Goat, available now from Tin House. I'm very pleased to have Gabrielle here on the show and to get to share our conversation with all of you right now. So here we go. This is me talking with Gabrielle Bates.
I traced the earliest seedlings of the book back to 2013 when I graduated from college and was beginning to move from Alabama, where I'd lived my entire life, to Seattle in the Pacific Northwest for love and poetry, where I was going to study poetry at the University of Washington. And I really started endeavoring towards this book at that point. And my entry into poetry generally was in college. I didn't know poetry was something people were still writing today. I thought it was kind of a long dead art form. And when I took a poetry class in college with the incredible poet Keitcha Kuipers, I read contemporary poetry collections for the first time and felt all these doors in my brain fly open. And I knew pretty instantly that this was something I had been searching for without knowing it my whole life. I had always loved books. I'd always been a voracious reader. But poems, the magic of poems was something that I didn't know I was allowed to do, really, which is funny to say, but it's true.
Okay, so what was it? What was it about poetry that you've been waiting for your whole life?
I think it was something in the music of it, the density of it, and the strangeness of it. The way poems make sense is often so different from the way other forms of writing make sense. And it seemed to match how my mind worked. I was an only child. I was an introverted person. I was wrestling a lot in a very interior way. And something about poems, the way they can be this release valve for so much that has been perhaps suppressed in the psyche and consciousness, that has been silenced, that has been hidden away. I think poetry is the language of those facets of a consciousness erupting out, like they refuse to be repressed any longer. And there's a strangeness and a power to that, and a music that is so pleasurable. And so I think, I don't know, I just felt so activated by it instantly. I was reading a book called Crush by Richard Seiken. It's his first book. And it's a very wild poetics on the page. It's very frenetic and weird and violent at times. And it just felt so alive to me and meaningful to me. So I was obsessed pretty instantly.
There's kind of an odd logic to poetry that I love. Like you say,
Yeah.
they make sense in a strange way, and it kind of cuts against maybe some of the more dogmatic ways that human beings can process reality. And it might not, when you're reading poetry that's hitting you, you might not understand exactly why it makes sense or even if it makes sense, but it feels more honest, maybe somehow.
Yes, it's exactly. There are so many paradoxes inherent in poetry. It's part of what I love about it. It's the language of the unsayable. How does that make any sense? It's felt thought. It's sensory and embodied, and yet so sparky for the mind. It's really an incredible literary art. I Yeah, and that sense of paradox, the suspension of one's typical way of reading the world, being forced into a kind of humility before it, is part of its power for me.
So you grew up in the South.
Yes, I grew up in Alabama, in Birmingham.
How was that?
How was that? It was all I knew for a long time, and then I went to college in Auburn, Alabama. I think, I mean, thinking about the South and growing up in the South was really forefront in my mind in the earliest years of working towards this book. And I thought it would end up having a lot more poems that felt like they were explicitly engaging with the South, but it ended up infusing the book much more as a kind of atmosphere. I feel the Southern Gothic as a literary tradition in the book really strongly, even in pieces that don't seem to be taking place in the South as a setting. But yeah, how was growing up in the South? That's a big question. It's probably a question I'll be wrestling with and writing through my whole life.
Well, there's a lot of love for Alabama in the book. I don't feel like it's one of these collections where somebody's sort of dissing their hometown or like
Good.
celebrating the fact that they escaped, which is like something that I might have written maybe in
Yeah,
my younger years. Not that
I'm
I'm not from the South, but my parents come from Louisiana and I was raised in the Midwest, but I have some sort of chip on my shoulder about Indiana that I probably need to get over.
Yeah, I have family in Louisiana too. And I'm so glad that love comes through in the book. That's really, it's important to me. And I think, a true love, a real love, is vexed by so much that can be really ugly and complicated and hard. And I was interested in this book in that sort of love, not some idealized version, not some, we have to tiptoe around difficulty, but rather if we go towards what scares us, if we go towards what feels difficult and vexed, that is part of the active form of loving a place, loving people, learning to love oneself. You know, you got to be honest if you're going to be able to do that. And that can be really, really hard. It can be painful. But that's the kind of love that I'm interested in, and the kind of love that I think the book itself is interested in.
I noticed that you don't really have a Southern accent.
Yeah, that's usually the first thing people say when I tell them where I'm from. They're like, but where did your accent go? And I recently got access to some old home movie footage that I didn't actually know existed on some old like 8mm tapes. And it's so interesting how I had such an accent as like a young child. And then somewhere around middle school, which is when I took part in some school plays, and I started researching a little bit, like different accents. And I really didn't want to have a Southern accent. I didn't want to be from the South in my youth. And so I think I just expunged it away. And there are times when that feels like a real sadness that I wish I could get it back. My family have very intense Southern accents.
Well, I have family from Birmingham, or who, they've lived in Birmingham for decades and decades. I have 4 cousins who grew up there. I think they all went to Auburn.
No way.
Yeah, War Eagle. So I've been to Birmingham several times and sort of know the town at least a little bit in my memories. I was there when I was a kid. But it's interesting to me, like you must have practiced. You must have had to like set up some sort of system to try to scrub that accent out, right?
I don't remember it being that regimented. I my grandfather, one of my grandfathers was British, and my mom and I would occasionally do British accents inspired by him and that side of the family. And maybe between playing with that and having a Southern accent naturally like equalized out or something. I don't know, because I don't remember practicing. It was more of like just a shift in my head. It was like I want to talk differently, and then I did. I don't think I practiced it much.
That's interesting because you did a good job. I couldn't, if you told me you were from Seattle, I would believe you. If you told me you were from the Midwest, I would believe you. But like, if you tell me you're from Birmingham, it doesn't sound like you're from Birmingham.
Yeah, I've heard that with certain words, and it's funny how certain syntactical constructions, like I will still use might, could in a sentence. There are certain Southernisms that endure even with the accent changed.
And you go back home, maybe it probably comes out a little bit. Or I find like if I have a few drinks and I'm in the South, all of a sudden I'm Southern.
I definitely can do it better. If I'm in the South, I invite it back in as much as I can, really. But it feels a little bit like a fake, like it doesn't feel true to me anymore, which I think is sad. I wish I could get it back.
Why did you want to not live in the South when you were a kid?
I had this sense that I wasn't in the right place. It's hard to describe it. Part of it is certainly just the negative stereotypes, of course, from all over, and not wanting to be affiliated with that. But I had a kind of wanderlust from an early age, and I would really romanticize far-flung places, and I longed to travel, and I just didn't get the sense in, the overwhelmingly conservative Christian environment I was in that I was among my people or something. I longed for an elsewhere, and I kind of pretended like I was from an elsewhere until I could actually leave.
It's interesting to hear you say that because I have talked to so many writers who have told me some variation of that very same thing over the years, where it's like, I'm not in the right place. A lot of people are like, I belong in New York. Like that's the place that a lot of writers I've spoken with told themselves as very young children is where they belonged. Isn't that strange? I guess it's from reading or seeing it in movies or television shows or whatever. But was the wanderlust that you described a second ago like general, or was there a place that you thought like I'm going to go there and that's where I'll fit in?
It was pretty general, actually. I think, I wanted to travel through Europe. I wanted to go to California. I mean, there have been times in my life when I've been very drawn to New York, and that makes sense because it looms so large for writers in the US and across the world, really. It's such a literary epicenter and overrepresented in media of all kinds. And there's a sense if you have ambition, if you're an ambitious artist, then that's where you're going to find your people. That's where you're going to make your big break. But yeah, there wasn't one particular place where I was like, that's where I really belong. I just wanted to experience. I just wanted to be in different places. And I think I was searching for my family of poets. I feel so grateful and lucky to be connected through poetry now to incredible people, incredible artists here in Seattle and all over the place, all over the world. The poetry communities are so small and so wide at the same time. And I now feel at home and not at home in so many places, including Birmingham. I think not feeling trapped there, I'm able to enjoy it much more when I go back to visit, although I do not dream of going back to live there full time at all.
So do you have, like, when you look at your literary identity and this interest that you have in writing, can you trace it? Like, is there a familial line? You mentioned that, what is it? One of your grandparents was British, but like when you look back at your ancestry, is there anybody else who was literary in your family?
Not that I know of, not that I'm aware of, but I think, like many people who grew up in a religious tradition, particularly if you're sort of all in and bought into it, which I did. I really, really believed in
What was the tradition?
a bizarre form of Christianity that I find difficult to describe because it was not a part of an official church. And it was really just like me, my dad, and my stepmother at the time. And but it was I was spending so much time with the Bible. And when you grow up at such a formative age, believing that a text is alive, that it carries knowledge that is crucial not just to your life right now, but your eternal life. Like, that's a lot of power in language and in a text. And so I think that was part of what made me really pay attention and take writing seriously from a young age. I think being an only child and lots of things going on around me that were confusing and frightening at times, I dove
Like
into
what?
books.
May I ask, like what?
So that stepmother was not a well person, very abusive and manipulative person, I would say, kind of a scammer personality in some ways. And she was a Christian therapist by trade.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So all my kind of most formative years, I was semi-constantly in a very twisted form of Christian therapy, which really did a number on me. But thankfully, she's not in the picture anymore.
Wait,
And
what is Christian therapy? Like, it's like therapy plus Jesus,
I
basically?
guess
Therapy plus
yeah,
an angry God?
yeah, I don't totally know. Yeah, a Christian informed. I don't know, but she was technically ordained clergy, so she had an air of authority about her, which unfortunately gave her access to vulnerable people's lives. But we don't need to go super into that. But yeah, so that was going on. I'm an only child. I'm trying to process these things. And I, escaped into books, into novels, and they gave me a way, to explore that world that I mentioned I was longing for.
Wait, and was your mom around? Like you said your dad had remarried and your mom was also in the picture?
Yeah, very, very much in the picture, but also at a remove. My parents got divorced when I was a baby, and there ensued a really brutal custody battle, at the end of which my father was awarded full custody, which was just, devastating for my mother, and which left me with a lot of kind of questions and wounds throughout my childhood. But I would spend like first and third weekends with her, and she would be as involved as she could be with this stereotypically evil stepmother, sort of keeping her as much at bay as possible. But I love both my parents so much, and they both love me so much, and I'm really grateful that stepmother's out of the picture. And as an adult, I'm able to have such rich, rewarding relationships with both of them, in ways that were fraught in my youth.
Well, I could feel it in the poems. Like there's like a mother longing that I could feel across some of the poems. And it almost made me wonder if your mother was still alive, like if I'm being honest.
Yeah, a lot of people have had that question because poems, they can take on this life of their own. They can start telling their own story, and it's often the sort of under the surface story that, this is true with so much writing, right? It's getting at this deeper, darker, emotional core story that's really just a facet of your more full life, but it's important, and it needed to live through these poems. I wish I was capable of writing a book that honored more of my mother's presence throughout my life, but this book really needed to explore the harms of the absence. And maybe in the next books there will be more different facets of experience that come to life.
Yeah, you got to get this one off your chest, right? You got to process.
Exactly. I had some things to process. I mean, I was working on this book basically throughout the decade of my 20s, and so there was an element of that coming of age, processing childhood.
Christian therapist, stepmother, like it's got to be processed. Like,
right?
You don't just leave that alone. That's going to be, grist for the mill. It just is.
Exactly.
I'm curious to know, like, did you have like a formal, at least in your mind, break with religion where you're like, okay, I'm out, or was it like a softer thing than that?
It was really soft. It was really, really soft, which surprises me. It was just sort of a gradual opening of my hand and letting it go. And I hope to keep everything that feels valuable and true about religious practices, and let go of everything that rings hollow to me about it. I've been thinking a lot lately about the importance of rituals and acknowledging mystery. And it's funny, after a reading I did in Spain once, a man came up to me and he said, "You say you're not religious anymore, but all the language you use when you talk about poetry is religious." And it's true. I had been using words like altar, sacred, all these things. And I wouldn't go so far as to say I've replaced a belief in God or replaced Christianity with poetry, but I kind of have.
Okay, so you're now you're like speaking my language, because I think the way that I've explained it to myself over the years, when I think about not only how I can enjoy reading poetry, even if I'm not entirely sure what's happening on the page, like I'll just kind of let it wash over me and sort of articulate its mysteries. Uh, I think what I am responding to is maybe like the hyper efficiency of the language, how much velocity there is, but also how poets seem to be grappling with, oftentimes anyway, seem to be grappling with like deep spiritual issues, if that's a way of putting it. It's like the big stuff and
Yeah.
and fast. And
Yes.
that's what I like, because so much of the time when I'm reading, maybe a novel in particular, I'm like, okay, but what's the problem here? What's going on with this person? Like, what actually matters? I'm looking for that just as a reader. And that's an expression of my personal taste, not like a value judgment on everybody's work. But I think that why I feel simpatico with poets oftentimes is because I share their concerns.
Yes. Chasing down these essential core truths, like getting at the core of them as close as we can. And I think too, I was just revisiting, this is going to make me sound like such a nerd and maybe more pretentious than I really am, but I was just revisiting Aristotle's Poetics.
As
And
one does.
as one casually does on a Tuesday afternoon. And there's this moment when he talks about like the function of poetry is to articulate what is possible, like what might happen. This sense of possibility that comes with poetry that feels so true to me, and feels so related to poetry being the language of the imagination. By reading and writing poems, I really feel that we are widening our capacity to imagine our lives, the world, what we owe each other, to grapple with things of vital importance like mortality.
I was going to say the undercurrent of all great poetry is like, don't you realize we're going to die? Which I think is like the undercurrent of my thinking often, as much as possible.
Yes.
Almost. I think it's actually a virtue to have that on your
Same.
mind, not to an obsessive or like overly morbid degree, but just as a
Yeah.
remembrance and a way of keeping things vital.
It is absolutely essential to attend to mortality when it comes to living the kinds of lives that are as in tune as they can be with who we are truly and what we need. And there are so many, I mean, we're barraged from all sides constantly through technologies, through social media, with these just shallow, disembodied, flat, distractive images. And a poem feels like the soul's antidote to that. It's going deep. It's slowing you down. It's slowing your mind down. You have to really sit with it. I think there are muscles in us that are atrophying so much. I think we all feel it, even if we're not aware of it, because of, the forces at play in our lives. And having a regular relationship with literature, period, but I think especially with poems, is a necessary counterforce to so much of that.
Yeah, I would say reading in general, just like reading especially like a paper book, like an old school book, whether it's a poem, and
Yes.
just the concentration that it requires and the disconnection from technology. It feels like kind of the slow food that we need, or
Yeah.
one of the
And
slow foods.
exactly. And I love that you mentioned the physical book, because I'm just more and more and more, and poetry helps me with this too, just aware of how crucial it is to remember that we have bodies, like sensory experience, no matter how small, the touch of this candle on my desk, the smell of this pipe tobacco on my desk, like, to remember that so much of our lives, so many of our lives take place virtually now. We're touching screens constantly, we're attending to screens constantly, and I worry that so many people are going to get to the end of their lives and be like, what what was that?
Yeah, I felt
um,
I felt very little. It was numb. I was scrolling, and then now it's over,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. I really had a panic a few years ago, even just with so much of my life, luckily, revolving around literature, books. Everything just started to feel so two-dimensional. It was all screen and and language, which of course is very deep and touches the senses. But I took a sculpture class because I was like, I need to attend to the three-dimensional for a while, as I never want to be so out of balance. Yeah,
Did it help?
it did help. Yeah, it was fascinating. And also, you can't be on your phone if your hands are covered in clay, which is very helpful.
But interestingly, you were sculpting a smartphone, which is
Yeah, everyone check out my store on Etsy where I sell clay
I was going to say,
smartphones.
I did a series of sculptures of smartphones and people with terrible posture hunched over a laptop. But I'm curious, what did you sculpt?
It was a figural sculpture class, so we had live models, and it was all about the body. I took another one on hands, sculpting hands. But yeah, I was really interested in, yeah, using my body to make bodies.
Yeah, I get that. Like, I feel like doing some sort of visual art, like uses different parts of the brain just as a way to kind of level out. Like,
Absolutely. And I've been thinking so much since I took those classes, and I've written about this in fiction that will probably never see the light of day. But the process of turning the pedestal in the middle of the room that the model is posing on to view from different angles, and that feels so poetic to me. That feels so much like what we're doing in poems often with our turns, with our voltas. I remember hearing the poet Terence Hayes say once that once he has a thought, he likes to turn it like a cube 6 times and see, like almost like a prism, what's hiding on the other side of that thought. And I loved how you would be revealed to be so wrong with each turn of the model. And it was that dimension that reaches towards you that was so difficult. You could match up the height and the width pretty okay, but then the model would turn and you would turn your clay, and suddenly there would be like a third leg, or like a really incorrect angle on the arm, and you would just have to adjust with each turn, and you would get closer and closer to really seeing and replicating what you were trying to. And I feel like that taught me a lot about how I already write, and how I want to keep writing, to keep turning the thing, to not just go with that first vantage, and the depth and the accuracy that one gets through that sort of process is really exciting to me.
what's a volta? I should probably know this. I feel like a
Yeah, so
fool.
the volta is in a poem. It's traditionally associated with the sonnet. So a short poem, it starts out maybe focusing in one way, and then near the end, there's a big turn. And that turn could be in where the gaze is. It could be suddenly a direct address where there wasn't one before. It's just like a notable shift in something in the poem. Yeah, is a volta or a turn.
I'm going to have to use that.
Yeah, and
Oh,
poems can have many voltas, but traditionally you hear of like the sonnet has at least one.
okay. So it sounds like you've made sense of existence through poetry and art, and that it is, in a way, a kind of spiritual endeavor and a way of like getting metaphysical in a manner that makes sense to you, like makes more sense than, say, like really dogmatic Christianity or the Christian therapy that your wicked stepmother exposed you to. Like, I'm curious to know, does that sound accurate to you? And then, like, where are you spiritually otherwise? Like, I'm just wondering where you've landed at this point in your life.
Yeah, I think that does feel mostly accurate. Yeah, I don't know if I have much more to say about it, except that it's an ongoing and rewarding question for me, and I I'm feeling newly lit up by poems in general, and returning back to reading some of the poets I read early on, some of the loudest, most musical poets like Wallace Stevens, Dylan Thomas, and really just riding those waves and enjoying what it sparks in my own mind. I really feel like writing is so connected to reading. It's almost a form of reading. And there is something spiritual about that. I mean, you write a poem and you're taking part in the oldest human conversation on record. That is nothing if not spiritual to me. It's putting me in touch with such a deeper and wider lineage of time. And so I learn more and more every day about the spiritual sort of dimension to this craft.
Are your parents cool with it? Because I mean, I say this like I'm the guy from the Catholic family who like checked out when I was a kid. I know what that can be like, where it's like, what are you doing? Like, are your parents like, what are you doing? And you're like, I got it. I'm just reading poetry.
We're all kind of on the same page. It's fascinating. My parents separately from each other, they divorced when I was a kid, but they have both become, neither one of them has a religious practice anymore that I know of.
That's got to be kind of rare in Birmingham, Alabama, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't know, my experience in the South in Louisiana is that it's like the church is such a cultural and social institution. It's such a part of the fabric of life in ways that it really isn't in other parts of the country, right? So like, it's almost alienating, I would imagine, to not be like people ask you if you don't have a church, you're like you're not a person.
Right. Even growing up, because we had what we called home church, even I felt alienated as like someone who was obsessed with God, and my faith was the lens through which I viewed everything. It was what I cared most about in the world as a kid. And yet even I didn't have a church. And so I felt like I was looked at askance. And yeah, the first questions anyone would ask you, it would be like, before what's your name? It would be like, where do you go to church? And are you an Alabama or Auburn fan? And that's a very different culture. Sometimes I forget, I've lived in Seattle for over 10 years at this point, and sometimes I really forget what it was like. And that was definitely part of why I didn't feel like it was my place. I didn't care about football. I didn't have a church, and I visited a lot of churches with friends, and that never felt right to me. The whole church thing, the pastors, it felt very false and bad to me. Like I believed in a sort of like a personal relationship with God through the Bible. That felt good to me for a while. But church itself, a Southern kind of white church, I visited Baptist church, Methodist church, all kinds, and none of it felt right to me.
Yeah, me neither. I was always like, what am I doing here? Get me out of here. I've always, I haven't always, but I've often in recent years joked that like the true religion of the American South is college football.
Yeah.
It's like the it's like the lingua franca. There's something really obsessive about it. And
people's whole identities are in that.
That's what I'm saying.
I remember hearing, I think it was a anthropology student in college said something like, way future generations coming to this campus, or, aliens visiting us from other spheres will like uncover this stadium and assume it was like a religious thing. Like clearly it was like of such importance, this like massive structure. It must have been for worship.
It's really, it's kind of bizarre to think about. It's like a simulated war game. You have like a lot of young, often like brown, young kids out there playing for the entertainment of like a largely white audience, and in the Deep South, which has its like
in a place with legacy of literal slavery, and the way they talk about these young men and their bodies is so disturbing.
Yeah. So it's like there's a dark like element to it. And yet, I mean, I'm also a sports fan. I'm capable of watching and enjoying a football game. I got to cop to
Mhm.
that. And I come from a family of people who are like rabid LSU fans. So,
Oh my God, my grandmother requested that her ashes be scattered on the field at LSU, which is, of course, very illegal. And they have a lot of security. So we weren't able to do that, but we did the tiger cage,
yeah,
Mike the Tiger.
Mike the Tiger. Yeah, I've been
We
there.
um we may or may not, for the feds listening, have left my grandmother near the tiger cage.
No way. So
Yeah.
wait, where in Louisiana is your grandmother from?
She lived in Baton Rouge for many, many, many years. She was originally from Georgia, though, but yeah, she lived and worked in Baton Rouge for most of her adult life.
Like Baton Rouge proper,
Mhm.
not far from the campus.
Yeah, not that far.
My mom grew up in a little town, like just outside of Baton Rouge, so I know that
Oh,
part of the country. So you go to Auburn, and you're like, where are you creatively at that point? Like, are you starting to go, okay, poetry is going to be my thing, or is that something that came later?
I knew I had to do something related to writing, to books. I had it in my head that like creative nonfiction was sort of the only respectable kind of writing that you could maybe make a career off of. So I was really studying like new journalism, like memoirs were like a huge craze. It was like a new thing at the time suddenly. Do you remember that time? It's
Yeah,
like
I mean,
very,
I've been through all these different phases, and
yeah,
they sort of keep cycling. I feel like they keep
yeah.
repeating or something.
It was so absurd, but it was like memoirs are the new hit thing. Um, and so I was really, really trying to force myself to become like a really creative journalist of like long form, beautiful nonfiction prose. And it just was not a good fit. But I just thought that was, you can't make a living as a poet. Like poetry was fun and amazing and I loved it right away, but I didn't see it as something I could really take up as a vocation until I was graduating from undergrad and I knew I wanted to get an MFA. I wanted to keep having support to read and write, whatever that took. And an MFA sounded like the best thing in the world. And my portfolio, when I looked at it, I really only had poems. I had like some really bad short stories and some really bad essays. Like I knew enough to know that the poetry sample was way stronger. And so I applied for poetry all the while planning to just use the time to grow my skills as a prose writer because I still, I was trying to think of ways I could actually make some kind of money or get a job. And so it was a gradual commitment to poetry. And I'm so lucky to live in a place that has things like Open Books, a poem emporium, one of the only bookstores in the world that's dedicated to poetry here in Seattle. And it's a very literary city. There's so many poets here compared to, where I grew up. There's just a lot more support and programming for writing of all kinds. And um, so I've been able to cobble together a lot of poetry related work. It does not pay shit, but it's something. I get to, freelance edit poetry books and teach here and there and work part time for this incredible bookstore. And I feel extraordinarily lucky in that regard. It's not a life I ever could have foreseen for myself when I started studying poetry at the University of Washington in
Oh,
2014.
I was going to ask. That's where you got your MFA,
Mhm.
and that's what got you out of Alabama.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
And was Seattle like a target destination, or is it just where you got in and that's where you ended up?
Yes, it is where my love took a job. And so I was like, I'm trying to get to Seattle
Ah, okay.
for love and poetry.
Got it. All right. So Judas Goat. Here again, I've got to admit, I feel like these are things I should know, but I didn't even know what a Judas Goat was. And then
Oh,
I'm on like the Wikipedia for Judas Goat, and I'm like, oh my God, these traitors, they're
it's
betraying their.
haunting, right?
Yes. So explain for people who are, similarly afflicted, like, and don't know what a Judas Goat is. What is a Judas Goat?
Yeah. Yeah, so it is not a term that I invented, contrary to some belief. It is a real thing. A Judas goat is a goat that is trained to live among the sheep. And so the sheep learn to trust this goat. And then when it comes time for slaughter, the goat leads the sheep into the slaughterhouse. The sheep are slaughtered. The goat is free to keep living its life. And I stumbled upon the existence of this phenomenon early on in the process of working towards this book. I didn't know at the time that it would become the title of the book or a major motif, but I was just so haunted by this being who may have no idea the violence they are facilitating, that has been trained in this way, trained to betray. And I, in my own life was wrestling with a lot of questions about the ways I had been trained to think and be, and, wondering about the repercussions of that.
Like what?
That, I mean, we've talked a lot about, religious upbringing. I was just so haunted by what I didn't know. And the lessons and narratives and ideas that I had embraced wholeheartedly, about the kind of person I thought I was supposed to be. And then that had started to feel like this armor that was suffocating me. It really felt like it was killing me, this attempt to be good and pure in all of these specific ways. And I don't know. I think, as a white person too, it was, a time when many people were having conversations about, the harms we do while being well-meaning, and not realizing it, the damage of our ignorance. And I was hoping to do as much of the work to deal with that as I could, to try to mitigate the harm I might be doing in the world in that way as well.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. That all resonates with me. Like somebody who's got kind of like the Catholic guilt thing, and who's also I've been humbled by life. I expect it will continue.
Yeah, that's one thing you can really count on life.
I was
going to
say it's going to happen, but maybe some people recognize it or feel it to greater and lesser degrees. But I think I can look to my past with so much just embarrassment, just how foolish I was as a young man and as a teenager. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I guess that's to be forgiven on some level, but this idea of being haunted by what you don't know, I think also this idea that you can hurt people without even realizing it or intending to. Like you can do great. That's one of the most troubling aspects of being a human being, is how you can cause like deep pain to people and not even realize it and have no intention of doing so.
Exactly. Yeah. Or even like think that you're doing the right thing or helping,
right.
like you're trying hard to help.
This Christian therapy is going to save you. I really believe it. It's going to lead you to the Lord.
Right.
Ugh.
Yeah.
So, okay. So the other thing that I wanted to ask you about, related to kind of the DNA of Judas Goat, the origin story of it, is this book, The Gift of Fear. I just read that you had read The Gift of Fear as a young person, and it had made an impression on you, and that you recognize the echoes of it in the book. I'm not saying that The Gift of Fear is some huge part of the collection, but it's just the kind of thing that I would underline and find fascinating. First of all, that you read that book at some sort of formative stage of your childhood. And then secondly, that you would be able to trace its influence into your poetry. Like, can you talk about that a little bit?
I forget that I ever divulged that publicly. That's so funny. I forget exactly how old I was. I could have been as young as like 9 years old, like 9 or 10 reading that book. And
it's by
the
what, Gavin de Becker?
that sounds right. That sounds right. I don't own the book. I haven't picked it up, since then, but
It's not it's not on the nightstand.
no, but it was a formative text for me as a young person, and the sense of hypervigilance
Well, what is it for people listening?
And you may have to help remind me, but it was, as I recall, a man who had worked in some form of like personal security detail, maybe, and he was trying to empower people, probably particularly women, and how to trust their intuitions about when they were safe or not, and like how to pick up on cues for when like a man might be about to try and kill and rape you. That's like how I remember it. And vivid in my mind still is like the elevator scene where it's like you're getting on an elevator with a man and something like you start to feel kind of panicked, like listen to that and get off the elevator was sort of like the takeaway. And so I don't know the extent to which that kind of shifted my lens on the world, but I know it was pretty big. I for that and other reasons, I had a lot of fear around sexual violence. I was just kind of afraid of sexuality, period, anything related to sex as a young person growing up, trying to be like pure and Christian. And so that was definitely part of it. But yeah, the sense that there was threat, particularly from men kind of all the time, was an intense way to move through the world, and something I was definitely working through in writing this book, for sure. Yeah. Have you read that book?
I want to say I've held it, and I was aware of it. He's like bodyguard to the stars, basically. Like people who have big bank accounts will hire him to sort of help them set up a security detail, and he'll sort of coach them and set up a plan, that kind of thing. He's like, I think that's what he does. But it's pretty heavy, like bedtime reading for like a 10-year-old girl.
Yeah, it was pretty terrifying, but it was given to me in this spirit of like, this will help you. I guess there was this sense that I had my head in the clouds or something and wasn't paying attention, and that I was going to be attacked or something. I don't know. But yeah, it was a very intense thing to read as a kid.
You ever take like self-defense lessons or anything? Did you get into martial arts?
I didn't. I think when I was on the volleyball team, we had like one group exercise where someone came in and taught us some basics, like how to pull. If someone grabs you by the wrist, you pull where the seam of your thumb and finger meet, is like the way to get loose from someone's grip, and things like that have really stuck with me. Your elbow is like a really, powerful part of the body to throw. But I know that from playing basketball.
Oh yeah. Well, I thought my daughter in school had some sort of self-defense unit in like PE, basically. And they had this guy in this big suit, coming up. The girls are able to punch him. It's kind of like it's like a fat suit, but it's like, providing cushion. But I was like, okay, I guess this is good. I don't want her to be terrified, but you got to sort of, it's the way the world is.
Yeah, but hopefully that has the opposite effect. It's like, if you feel, whether it's true or not, if you feel like you can take somebody to a degree, that probably gives you a bit of confidence moving through the world. I'm not sure. I remember getting the advice at some point that rather than fight back, just like act absolutely insane and piss yourself, and that will like repel people and maybe they'll leave you alone.
I guess that's one way of doing it, but it's like you got to be able to execute. Like, it's like, in the midst of, it's like having like pepper spray or a baseball bat, or I guess some people would.
I would worry. I would fumble those things for sure.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's like, it's great.
I think you could probably piss yourself if you're terrified.
Maybe I might get stage
I hope
fright.
neither one of us ever needs to find out.
Yeah, like they always do this in the movies. People are always puking in movies, and then people are often like peeing themselves in fear. two things that I've never puked. I
Yeah.
haven't puked since I was like 8. I'm knocking on
Wow.
wood.
Brag about it.
I don't know. No, I shouldn't say that. When I was drunk, I would, in college or whatever, I might have
Yeah.
barfed a couple times, but like, I feel like puking is for children. All these people in movies, they see something awful and these adults are just puking everywhere. It doesn't feel true to life. And then these like people peeing their pants when they're terrified.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't
But
know.
that's the problem with cinema, right? They're having to figure out a way to translate everything happening on the inside into something we can view from the outside. And that leads to some pretty unrealistic tropes, but they're translating across mediums often.
That's a good
I'm
point.
thinking particularly about adaptations of books.
No, but that's a good
Well,
point.
how do we show he's scared?
It leads me to my next question, and a very elegant segue now, because I know you've been asked about this by pretty much everybody who's talked to you about this collection, but the dedication of the collection is for the image. You've dedicated the book to the image. What is the image? What's going on here?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't feel like as many people have asked about it as I expected, because that dedication wasn't in the ARC, like the advanced reader copy that went out to most reviewers and stuff. It didn't have like front matter, back matter yet. But I dedicated the book to the image as this idea, this way of rendering a sensory experience, conjuring a visual in the mind of a reader that's going to be variable, of course, depending on whoever that reader is at that time. But it's creating some sort of sensory and visual experience through language. It's just something that absolutely captivates me as a process, and trying to figure out ways to create images that feel deep, that feel like they have layers, that have resonance, as opposed to something more like a detail or a flat picture in words, which is also very interesting. But I think we feel the difference when there's just something haunting about an image for me. And I think I'm also just naturally a very kind of visual and tactile person. And so it makes sense that I would be drawn to that element of poetry. But I think it really began, from that like natural inclination paired with praise. Like in my earliest poems, that was kind of the only thing that ever got people's attention. It would be like, not really into where you're trying to think about stuff, but whoa, this image is like startling, or I can't stop thinking about this image. And so that primed me to be curious about what all could be done with that on the page.
It's amazing how much we're shaped by our like compliments.
Absolutely.
Like, please, I always joke. I'm like, just tell me who I am. What do I do? This is good. Okay, I'll be this.
Yeah. Oh, I had so much of that energy as a younger person, especially. But I also think it's interesting because I had a natural inclination to want to be good at everything I wasn't naturally good at. And so I spent a lot of time trying to write a very different kind of poem because it didn't come as naturally to me, much kind of headier, much more conceptual, experimental kind of work. Because I thought if I could do that, then I'll really be impressive. Then I'll really be worth taking seriously. And so dedicating my book to the image was a way of saying, no, like what my natural disposition has something of value, and there's something in really committing to what comes naturally and digging into that, like deeply studying, not just being like, oh, I'm decent at this thing, I'll keep doing it, but really getting more and more curious about what you can do with that if you keep pushing. Yeah. And
it's like honoring it.
Yeah, I think so. There's this inclination in many people to discount what comes naturally, and I think a lot about what Garth Greenwell says in interviews sometimes about style, and noting those things about your writing that are weird or different or most alive for whatever reason and dialing it up to 100 and seeing what happens, as opposed to revising them out because you're like, oh, this is a something that just keeps happening whether I want it to or not. You can get really annoyed with those things, but what happens if you embrace them and do them even more?
Wow, I'm really good at this and it comes naturally to me. I better get rid of it.
Yeah. Isn't that wild that so many of us think that way?
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally get it. It's like, oh no, I got to do this other thing that somebody else is really good at in order to be like them.
Yeah.
Because I don't know who I am, or I'm not comfortable with myself, or whatever it is. But there's another, you keep mentioning animals, and that's definitely a recurring motif throughout the collection. And there is, I believe, a box of notebooks in your past that you kept when you were a college student, in which imagery that you have like returned to in the collection, and also I guess imagery related to domesticated animals in particular, was in those notebooks. And when you look back at them, you realize like, oh, I've been on this trail like for longer than maybe I even realized. Like, what's your relationship to like the animal kingdom? like I'm curious to know, like, what do you eat? Are you one of these animal people who like rescues, and fosters kittens, or like what's going on with you in that way?
That's such a great question. And you're such an amazing interviewer. I love the research that you do. And it's so funny to be on the receiving end of it. I'm used to listening to you talk to other people. I think we're so often just orbiting the same things our whole lives, and we can think we're getting away from it and then be faced with this evidence that no, this has been a concern for much longer than you realized. And that definitely happened to me with those notebooks. What is it with me and animals? I've thought about this a lot because that's one of those things I cannot escape. Like if I try to write a poem without animals in it, it's like impossible. I don't understand. And I mean, I've been drawn to them my whole life. I think most children, feel like they have, a draw to animals. So much of children's literature is populated with animals or have animals as their main characters. And Kate DiCamillo talks about that and this shared sense of smallness. But, as an adult, I continue to be obsessed with them. So I can't fully say, I'm just still a child in that regard.
Did you grow up with animals? Like, you didn't live on a farm or anything? I
was born on a farm. So there's this way that the farm as a place with cows and some horses and a donkey is like this mythical space where that was like it was there at my inception, but I have no actual memory of it. I have a few pictures.
Were you home birthed? Like you were born on the farm? Like
no,
like Jesus
but that's
in
where,
the manger?
That's where my parents lived on a farm.
Okay. I was like picturing you. Like
that phrasing was misleading. No, I was born in a hospital and brought back to the farm.
Gotcha.
But I think because that was also the place where, I can imagine my parents together. I have no actual memory of my parents ever being together, living in the same house. I have no memory of that farm, but it took up kind of a mythical space in my psyche as the sort of Eden, where Adam and Eve were together, where I, was born. And so there's this way that horses and cows and domesticated animals have always had that sort of intimate distance for me. And growing up in Alabama, I was always sort of adjacent to farms. I like through step families, through friends. So, I'm very comfortable around large animals. Like, I'll jump up on a horse and
you can do that. You can you can run and like jump
I'll
up.
just bareback jump on a horse. Yeah. I have no fear of that. I probably should have fear. I don't know why I don't, but I don't own any pets. I don't have regular contact with animals in my life. I have no interest in owning them myself. I just, any chance I have to be near them, I take.
You eat meat?
I only recently started eating some meat. I had like a bizarre, I don't know if I was iron deficient or what, but there was this period of time last spring when I was feeling so lethargic, so depressed, so cold, and I just started fantasizing about a steak. And I'd never had a steak in my whole life, ever. And
Wait, what? You never had a steak growing up
I'd
in
never
Alabama?
had a steak. I had like eaten beef before, not a lot, but I'd never had like a steak on a plate. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Like cutting into a steak.
Yeah.
And I was fantasizing about it, and I got one, and it was delicious.
You're like, okay, I feel better. Some people though, like, yeah, the iron deficiency, and some people's bodies, you need.
I mean, I really do believe if you're having like a really strong craving for something, I think you should probably have it. But yeah, so I don't have like a hard line on that. But before then, I didn't miss it. It wasn't like something I was giving up.
Wait, so you were vegetarian before?
Pretty much. I don't know why like labels like that annoy me. I'm just like I didn't really eat meat. I would always eat oysters though.
Okay. Yeah, I get that. I mean, I feel like they're I don't really eat meat, but if I had to, I always say like I'll eat like shrimp or oysters. I feel like they don't feel the pain as much or something.
Yeah, there's something about an oyster that's so fascinating. It's like in a category all its own, this like plant, animal, you're eating like the entire organism at once.
I guess that's good. Yeah, I feel like there's
I
something.
guess that's good.
Well, no,
Their blood is salt water. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's what I mean, though. It's like I feel like there's something. I feel better about that than I would about eating some like box of like processed crackers or something.
Oh. Yeah. At least it's natural.
Yeah. So, okay. So I'm just curious. I was just curious, like the animals seemed to loom large for me when I was reading, and I was just.
Yeah, they do. And it's interesting. I mean, since the book came out and as I've been writing new work, my engagement with animals feels really different, and yet like all part of the same core impulse. But the animals are becoming more animals of the mind, more like a kind of dream symbolism of animals that I don't have that sort of lived experience with. Like, the animals throughout Judas Goat are domesticated animals, are animals I have seen, with my own eyes and touched and whatnot. But I've been writing so many poems with like swans and snakes, and which are like very similar creatures, with like the neck and the snake, because they were coming into my dreams so much. And so it feels like I'm still obsessed with animals.
And snakes were coming into your dreams like with regularity?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I don't know. That's what I'm writing to try to uncover a bit.
You didn't Google it or like ask Siri?
Well, I absolutely have researched.
Okay.
Yeah.
What'd you find out?
I have a whole book of like symbols. The Penguin Book of Symbols. Do you know this book?
No.
It's so great. Oh, it's like catnip. You should have it and just flip through. Even if you're like stuck on a scene in your fiction or something, and you're like, well, there's a swan here. Let me look up and see if there's something I can play with in like the cultural symbolism of swans from all these different traditions. It's really fun. It's really interesting.
Well, just give me a sample. Like, what did you take from the Penguin Book of Symbols when it comes to swans and snakes?
It's been a while since I've looked at it, but for swans, I remember loving. They were sort of like a symbol of like both large celestial lights at once. So like sun and moon are sort of like both in the swan in some tradition. And, they're sort of the obvious ones of affiliations with certain types of beauty and purity. But of course, they're just mean as hell. They're really kind of like ugly, vicious birds. And so I love that contrast.
The moon, the sun, homicide,
antagonism.
Yeah, like violent antagonism. You're saying all this, and I'm thinking of all things of like my Instagram algorithm, because I get fed so many animal attack videos.
Oh no. And you
Listen,
used to get this is going to make me sound like a stalker, but you used to get like people jumping into holes from really high
yeah,
distances.
lots of like parkour and base jumping, this is lots of fitness models. And like, I swear to God, I'm not some like creepy old pervert. I'm just a guy who's like very susceptible to like health related content. Like if it's like, do this to be fit, I'm like, I'm watching, and, the Komodo dragon was coming to mind for me as I was listening to you talk about swans, because I'm terrified. Like that is a very sticky animal for me. I'm like, I can deal with like a mountain lion. I can deal with a bear. But if I saw a Komodo dragon walking toward me, I would be utterly terrified. Like,
I love Komodo dragons
have you,
because they're so terrifying. They're like dog reptile, like this.
have you,
They're
have
so
you seen
big.
them? Have you seen them eat? Like if you ever see a Komodo dragon, like eat like a little deer, or like they
Oh
eat them
my
and
God. I don't know if I have seen them eat. I've seen them run.
yeah, yeah. But they come towards you, and then all of a sudden they just grab, they grab one of these animals. They eat them whole. They eat like an entire deer whole. It's the most terrifying thing. And
Wow.
I'm also thinking in some sort of weird, like pop culture-y, like distantly related way. Remember when Sharon Stone's husband, I think it's like now her ex-husband, got attacked by a Komodo dragon?
Maybe vaguely. I'd totally forgotten about that.
He was like really fucked up.
Yes, I do remember that.
I mean, he didn't die, but like it fucked him up. Like he got, the
Yeah.
thing bit him. Like I gotta see. I don't know what their teeth look like, but they've got to be. So anyway, that's like, maybe I'll write a poetry collection about Komodo dragons.
That would be awesome. Please send it to me immediately if you do.
Where do they live?
Uh,
They live in Indonesia. I think they live in Indonesia. But
yeah, you might have to travel. There's
uh,
going to be a whole
yeah,
journey
research.
for you with the Komodo dragon.
Just me on like, because they're also like, I'll see like these videos. They're just like on a beach, and it's
Yeah.
like I don't want to be on a beach and see a dragon coming towards me, like ready to like devour me. The only
Yeah.
good thing is that they're like, I think I could outrun one. You can kind of zigzag, and they can't, like, it's not like you're running away from like a mountain lion or something.
Yeah.
You can
As
get
long as
away
you're equipped with how to escape, that's important.
as long as you're like terrified and in flight. You should be okay. But
Yeah.
it's
How, like, for me, fear is one of, if not like the most interesting and important motivators for my writing. I'm so interested in what fear has to teach us. And I'm curious, like, with your own writing, does that ring true at all? Or is that like a weird kind of poet thing?
no, I think it rings true. I think you got to lean into, like, I mean, it depends, I guess, what kind of writing you're doing. But if you're writing poetry, or you're trying to write in some sort of literary vein, or even not, I mean, you could be writing horror fiction and be leaning hard into whatever fear
Mhm.
obsesses you, or challenges you personally. I think these things can come out in different ways, but it seems like if the writing's going to be vital, you got to go into those places, and that's that's sort of the service you're providing. You're like a coal miner. You're going down in into the darkness,
Yeah.
and you're going to try to surface with something, for the reader. But I think it's fear. I think it's like the big questions, which are often connected to fear.
Mm.
Like that's the stuff that fuels me. And like I think as a writer, like something really, I hate to say this, but something awful has had to happen in order for me to sustain the energy for a book length project. Like I don't know if it's possible for me to write from some like purely happy place. I think it's
Yeah.
got to be something complicated and a little bit dark, and maybe, yeah, like a little bit terrifying.
That hugely resonates with me. And I used to really bemoan that aspect. And at this point, I've made peace with it, I think. But I think it's maybe because, those happier, less complicated energies, we have ways of accessing those and articulating those off the page in our lived lives, and the other stuff we don't,
It's like the
like we
shadow
kind of,
side.
yeah, yeah. And it's amazing when you're able to bring some of that lightness in. But exactly, it's that what's going to sustain you, what's going to feel so vital and important, that it's going to bring you back to your desk day after day and see a project through to fruition. Yeah, it's going
Well,
to be the hauntings.
it's going to be the hauntings, but I think for me too, there's got to be a way to like kind of make it funny. a little bit.
Oh yeah. I mean,
Otherwise I'm just like swimming in darkness, and it becomes like overwhelming.
humor is so important. And I mean, the people in my life who have been through the most tragedies often are the ones who are the loudest laughers. They're so funny. It's such a crucial survival element.
I always say
Humor.
I'm the easiest laugher. I'm like desperate for laughs. Like any joke,
Yes,
please. Like I'll go for it, you know, unless it's like really, really mean or something. But
I really feel that. I think if at some point you're kind of broken open to the world for whatever reason, to whatever degree, yeah, you're going to be more susceptible to laughter. You're going to cry easier. You're going to, there's just all of those um switchboard connections in the mind, they're all kind of close, all those emotions.
so have you, I mean, speaking of being broken open, like I've been through a number of personal tragedies. I don't want to oversell it. It's just loss, you know, and some difficult stuff like family health stuff, which I've written about and talked about even on this show. Maybe too much, but it's
Mm.
my life. And I feel like that stuff sucks and it's hard, but it does end up opening you, I guess, if you let it. But, you know, it's hard to sort of separate who I am now from what those experiences taught me or whatever elements of me were forged like in those fires. So, like along these lines, I'm just curious, like, have you been through like really difficult stuff that has helped to form you as a person and might have like led you down this path into poetry?
Mm. I think the kind of ever shifting family dynamics of my childhood were sort of like one kind of prolonged form of a kind of trauma, if I can use that word there.
No, that's fair. That
Yeah.
like you don't have to apologize for that. That's a difficult one. And I love this image of the farm being like the Eden of your imagination.
Yeah, yeah. And both of my parents were remarried multiple times. They're both now with wonderful people that make me so happy for them and the whole family, both. But for
So
a
so
while,
they landed and they finally got it. They figured it out.
yeah, yeah, it's
Good.
so thrilling. But there, it was touch and go there for, the whole time I was living in Alabama, really, for both of them. They were kind of ending up with not not the right people for them, or maybe anyone, and so so that added some stress for sure. But and then in the last few years, there's been so much death, and including in my kind of personal sphere, losing grandparents, which one expects, but losing them in some really rough ways, and one grandmother in particular. Well, yeah, I won't go into all that. But and a dear friend who died very young and suddenly from cancer, and I wasn't able to be there. And so there's been, yeah, the kind of tragedy of not having the rituals of mourning, not having funerals. It's like people in my life keep dying, and there's no marking of it collectively. It's like I'm in Seattle, and I think it's part of like cremation. Like I think when people were buried in the earth, there was sort of like, we got to put the funeral together. We're gotta like go put them in the ground, and there was kind of a
Well, there's
structure
also
there.
the wake, you know, like you look at the dead body.
Exactly.
Like I don't
I
know.
think that's important. I think that act is really, really important. I don't think people understand how important it is. Um, and so these people in my life, grandparents, friend, they're cremated, and people are sort of like, well, we could do something at some point, and then nothing ever happens. And so
No
I
funeral.
just feel left with these just like totally, yeah. And so I've been thinking a lot about how to make my own rituals, in the wake of death, because I cannot keep going on this way.
But you're like, if I have to spread the ashes of one more relative over Mike the Tiger's cage, I'm going to lose my mind.
Well, yeah, that's the most that we've had for that one grandmother. Yeah, we at least did that. Yeah, we did eventually gather in honor of her, but yeah, for my it's just
What's up? But I don't get
and
it. I
part
don't
of
get it. Like no funerals? Like they're just people just die and they don't have a funeral?
yeah.
Okay.
Part of it for a bit was, ongoing pandemic concerns and travel, but even I feel like even before then, it was just, I don't know if it's like a my family thing or what, but yeah, and for the friend, it's sad. So yeah, I'm on the hunt for some morning rituals that I have control to do. And I think also maybe I just need to be more prepared to take charge. I've been looking to people older than me to play that role, and I think maybe I don't have to.
Yeah.
Just organize my own funerals.
I'm sort of haunted by the idea of I don't think anyone, like, who's going to come to my funeral? I guess I won't be around to care, but it's like,
Yeah, that's the good thing for you.
it'll like, things will like degrade or degenerate so badly on the technological front that it'll be like on Zoom. You don't have to leave your house. Just tune in at noon and, we'll have like a live feed from a small airplane. We're going to dump Brad's ashes into the ocean.
Ooh, airplane. Is that the vision? No. Is that what you would want?
It's funny. My wife and I, we did a will. We did like via legal Zoom.
Good.
Yeah, you have to because you have children and you got to, especially when you have kids, you've got to, it's a responsible thing to do to sort that stuff out.
Yeah, some people, you'd be surprised, they just don't want to think about it, so they put it off. And
I did it right away.
So annoying for everyone.
Did it right away. But I think like, it was basically like, just cremate me, sprinkle me somewhere beautiful. Those are my only instructions. You can do whatever you want. I honestly, truly don't care because I won't be here. But I don't know. Maybe I should be more defined in what I want,
Well, if there's a particular beautiful place of any meaning to you, you can mention that. But I think that sounds like beautiful.
Okay. All right. I just don't want to like cause stress now that I'm thinking about it. And maybe I need to give I need to demand a funeral service so that there's some structure.
Like you must gather. Yeah. I don't think people realize how much they need that. Just like being among other people who knew the person really soon after they're gone, like not putting that off a really long time to try to organize the perfect thing or just get together. I think that's important.
Yeah. People need that, like in grief. And I think in particular, like the people closest to the deceased need to like have that contact. So before I let you go, I want to sort of end maybe on a bit of a lighter note. And I underlined something that you said in another interview that you did. I think it was kind of like your advice to writers, but maybe it's advice to yourself, where you say, my advice is to write what you need to write to get free. Write towards the heat, wherever it goes. Do you agree with yourself, first of all? And then what does that mean in practice for you? Like, what did it mean in the writing of Judas Goat, and what does it mean in the work that you're doing currently?
Oh, I absolutely still stand by that and believe that. Yeah, write what you need to get free. I think that's an emboldening idea for me because, I spent so much of my life and still do, wanting to really be there for others, really please others. But sometimes in the writing, we need to be other than that. And it's because there's something that needs to break through to get free. And I think it's so interesting to think of heat in relation to poetry. It's something I've been thinking about a lot, this like sense of temperature and chasing the heat. And I've noticed by the end of my poems, at least in early drafts, there's often a sense of cold. It's like, that's when I know that the poem is done, is because the heat has fled or something. But it's really just another way of saying, the energy, the aliveness, what sort of quickens your pulse, or these are the physical manifestations that you are activated, alert, risking something, and risk is at the core of it all. So yeah, chase the heat.
And be vulnerable.
And be vulnerable. Yeah.
Scare yourself a little bit.
Exactly.
So are you working on anything new? Can you give any hints? Is there another poetry collection in the works? Are you writing about animals? Like, what's happening?
I have been writing and reading like mad the last few months in particular. I just feel like I hit this vein, and I have a lot of new poems. I'm still listening to them to try to figure out how they might want to cohere together in a chorus of a book. It's really important to me that the individual poems feel like worlds in their own right, where if you flipped open to a random page, you could have a meaningful experience with it on its own. And also the experience of a book as a whole is really important to me. And so I anticipate it will take a long time to really figure out the order and the relationship and what all still needs to be written. But I'm definitely working on a new book of poems. It's very, the music is louder and it feels a little more...
It's like more Judas Priest than Judas Goat. Is that...
Someone accidentally said the title of my book was Judas Priest once, like before an event, I think.
Fair,
and I was just
fair.
like, oh my
Take
God.
it.
Or someone else said Judas the Goat.
Well, I'm glad I didn't screw it up. I feel good about myself.
No, you didn't, because I'm keeping track. Yeah, inspired in part by just like a really vexed relationship to sleep like a year ago, and proximities to a kind of madness.
What, you're an insomniac?
I have been throughout my life here and there. This was more situational. We had a really troubled next door neighbor who, escalating across almost 8 months, we were the target of some paranoid delusions that he was having, and he was getting increasingly violent. We did not feel safe at home. We could not sleep. He would play really loud music outside our door late into the night, into the early morning.
What kind of music?
Awful.
Just curious. What was the music?
Oh, like vaguely Dave Matthews Band style.
Oh, wow.
On like a speaker that he would set up in his doorway facing our apartment door, just on full blast.
Like paranoid delusions and like crash into me, like ants marching.
He was trying to provoke a confrontation with the music.
I've been there. We had a crazy neighbor years ago who
I'm so
was
sorry.
very into meth, and things got weird with his ex-boyfriend. Like, guy was like crawling, like he was climbing, like Spider-Man was climbing up the facade of our apartment building to get in over the balcony. Yeah. It was like that sort of, it was just nutty.
Exactly. Okay, so you get it. I'm so sorry you get it. But yeah, that was some of the kind of energy, but we were both on ground floor, so he could see right into our windows, and we shared a wall. And
you're like, I might need to read The Gift of Fear again. You're like reaching for Gavin
Gavin
DeBecker.
Yeah. There were nights when we were like sneaking out the back door with like a bag, finding a place to sleep for the night. Like it was, it was really scary. And I'm very happy to not be in that living situation anymore.
But you're going to be writing about it. It's going to find its way into your work.
It already has. Yeah. Because I was going real loopy from lack of sleep. And, it was like, I couldn't sleep and I couldn't wake up, and I was in this sort of like delirious fog, more and more for about 8 months. And so the writing shows that it's writing that is coming apart at the seams a bit, and so it feels a bit wilder and weirder, but there are still animals there.
What kind of animals?
Well, the swans.
Oh yeah,
the snakes.
That's right, swans and snakes. Try to work a Komodo dragon in, if you could, please. You could dedicate
just for you, and I'll put a note at the end of the book about it.
Yeah, just be like, this is dedicated to Brad Listi and his fear of Komodo dragons. So, and last question is, are there any inklings of wanting to write in other forms, or is poetry the thing for you?
Oh, absolutely. I've been on a incredibly humbling, quite mortifying, actually, journey working on a novel for many, many years. It's probably my biggest creative dream, and has been since I was a young person, since before I knew about poetry. Novels are really important to me, and I feel like if I'm on my deathbed and I look back at my life and I didn't give it, as much of a shot as I could, that would be like my primary regret. And so I haven't been working on it the last couple of months because the poetry energy has been so strong. But before that, that's what I was spending the vast majority of my creative energy on. And it just does not come naturally to me. And yet I feel so determined to do it. And I do trust that if I keep showing up and attempting, that eventually I will get there. But it's really humbling.
It's hard.
It's really humbling.
It's awesome.
I think writing a novel, exactly. It's hard even for people who it comes more naturally for.
Yeah. No, I mean,
it's just a hard fucking thing to do.
That's right. Yeah. I've been there. I feel like I'm always there in some way.
Yeah.
But there are some people for whom, like, I don't know if I'll ever get like a clear answer to this question, but I do feel like there are some people for whom it just comes more easily. But I think more often than not, it's just people who are just like comfortable or more comfortable with the pain of it. And just the sheer labor of it and all the uncertainty and failure that it sort of entails. You just got to be good with that.
You have to turn off some part of your brain to it's a faith. It's related to like an idea of faith. You have to, like, against all the evidence that your eyes are showing you, you have to believe that at the end of the slog, there's going to be something of value. And that's its own kind of madness. And thank God people are able to do it,
What's the novel? Is the novel like about your childhood or something? Or is it set in Birmingham?
No, not at all. It is taking place in some version of Alabama. But it's a lot inspired by my interest in sculpture, actually. So that was another part of taking the sculpture classes, was novel research, in addition to my own need to get back in touch with the three-dimensional.
War Eagle, the debut novel by Gabrielle Bates. No, I'm sorry.
Oh my God.
War Damn Eagle. Isn't it like, don't you have to add the damn? Like,
yeah.
It's like war.
Yeah, I think that's important. Yeah.
That's what, for people listening who don't know, that's what the Auburn football fans say. Because the War Eagle is the mascot, right? Of the, or no, the Auburn Tigers.
And now the listeners can't say we didn't teach them anything.
That's right. Well, I think our work here is done. Gabby, it's great to meet you. Congratulations on Judas Goat. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk.
Thank you so much, Brad. It's a huge honor to get to be on this show that I love so much and learn so much from. So thank you so much for having me.
All right, folks, there we have it. That's today's conversation with Gabrielle Bates. Totally delightful, right? Her poetry collection is called Judas Goat. It's available from Tin House. Go get your copy wherever you get your books. Hopefully somewhere good. Fuck Jeff Bezos. Gabrielle Bates has a website. It's gabriellebat.es. gabriellebat.es is the website. And there's social media happening. I'm trying to figure out. I think it's Instagram, maybe Twitter. Something like that. Maybe Bluesky. I don't know. But definitely Instagram. And again, the book is called Judas Goat. Go get it. Read it. Read it aloud. In public. Don't forget to subscribe to this show wherever you listen. Follow me on social media, Bluesky and Instagram. Sign up for my newsletter over at Substack. And if you like this program, if you tune in regularly, if you're a fan of The Other People Show and you want to help me keep making The Other People Show, join the Other People Patreon community. Throw a few bucks in the hat and help keep this literary empire rolling. You can sign up for the Other People Book Club at the show's official website, otherppl.com. Get yourself an Other People t-shirt or a sweatshirt while you're at it so you can represent the podcast in public. If you have 2 minutes and you want to help me out, please rate and review this show wherever you listen. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen, rate it, review it. It helps the show in the algorithm. It helps the show find new listeners. If you want to read my latest book, it's a novel called Be Brief and Tell Them Everything, available in paperback and audiobook editions and ebook. There are options for you, and they're out there. Again, the book is called Be Brief and Tell Them Everything. So coming up on Thursday, I will be back with my friend and co-host Mira Gonzalez for another episode of Brad and Mira for the Culture, the weekly pop culture podcast that Mira and I have been producing for almost a year now. It's kind of a break. That's the idea. It's a break from the madness. It's about nothing serious. You can turn it on and it's not going to bum you out unless you hate pop culture. But even if you do, it's like we're kind of poking fun at the whole thing. So I think people like it. I've been hearing good things. I think people need a break. I know we all have to pay attention and we all have to do stuff and we all, I get it. But sometimes it's good to just hear two people talking about meaningless bullshit. Brad and Mira for the Culture coming up on Thursday. Thank you for listening. More soon. Stay tuned.